Hi guys. Before we proceed to this video, we've got something very important to share with you. Neoliberalism, Inequality and Authoritarianism by Professor John V. Kofis is available for purchase. You can order it directly from the publisher Little French eBooks or through Amazon.
Hello, welcome to a session on hybrid authoritarianism. This is only an introduction, a teaser session intended to invite you to watch the full analytical one. Hybrid authoritarianism is prevailing, has been prevailing under the political economy of neoliberalism since the 1980s. Hybrid authoritarianism refers to a system, a type of regime where democracy is identified strictly on the basis of electoral politics. However, the fact is, whether in the United States or in France, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, especially in countries like the United States, the very wealthy billionaires and corporations who fund campaigns of both political parties, the Democratic and the Republican in the United States, multi-party systems in other countries, they are behind the people selected to be candidates. So the voting public is essentially handed on a platter a choice of pre-selected individuals, and then they vote. So in either case, these pre-selected individuals, within varying degrees, will carry out the social contract faithfully on behalf of what Senator Bernie Sanders in the United States, for example, calls the billionaire class, the oligarchy. This is a serious situation because, especially in the last 20 years or so, especially since the Great Recession of 2008, which of course starts on Wall Street and it spreads globally, there has been a rise of authoritarianism and with the thin veil in front of it of electoral politics. And so they can claim, well, we're still democratic, when in fact, democracy is identified not on the basis of elections alone, but rather policies rooted in social justice, not elections, but social justice. The social justice criteria is missing from hybrid authoritarian regimes. So here we are in the mid-2020s with hybrid authoritarian regimes endeavoring to make hybrid authoritarianism the norm and have people eliminate the term social justice. In fact, there have been officials in a number of countries, including in the United States, in this government, in the government of President Donald Trump, who maintain that the term social justice is an anathema to them, and that social justice is the domain of leftists, of Marxists, when in fact the term social justice has a very long history, and one of the great thinkers in history who popularized this term was the English philosopher Sir Thomas More. In the early 16th century, a contemporary of the theologian Martin Luther, except that Sir Thomas More was a Catholic. And the social justice concept and the ideology of social justice is rooted in the progressive wing within the Catholic Church. Sir Thomas More was concerned about inequality, about social injustice in England at the time of the embryonic stage of capitalism. So what we have today are government officials and spokespeople, including the media, by the way, that regard social justice rooted in Christian doctrine, okay, Christian morality. And like I said, Thomas More is the prime example in his famous book. I believe 1516 is when he published it, or 1512, somewhere in the early 16th century. The book is entitled Utopia, a Greek word which means no place, in other words, the ideal place, where he describes the plight of the poor at the time of peasants and serfs in England specifically, but a very important work in outlining that society must be rooted in the morality of social justice, something that today hybrid authoritarians from US to Turkey to Latin America to Argentina under Javier Milei, for example, the other neoliberal pro-Trump ally, to India under Modi and other countries throughout the world, Viktor Orban in Hungary, they regard that term as a term linked with leftists, Marxists, although long. Marx, by the way, lived in the 19th century, in the mid-19th century. This is long before Marx, long centuries before Marx, when this concept arises. Now, decades from now, scholars will look back at the 2020s as the decade when hybrid authoritarianism is consolidated, and the decade when there is rising resistance to it. And the question will be, what will prevail? Will liberal democracy based on Enlightenment era principles of the 18th century, when the United States, for example, was founded as a republic, not a monarchy, a republic, will that prevail, or will a form of hybrid authoritarianism, which is more like a regime that is a dictatorship in terms of policy, catering to, again, I refer to Senator Sanders, there are obviously others in the Senate as well as the House of Representatives in the United States, who argue that the policy is geared to benefit the smallest percentage of the population, the richest 1%. In his speech yesterday at No King's Day, 18th of October 2025, Senator Sanders pointed out that Elon Musk, one person on his way to becoming a trillionaire, the world's richest man, owns more wealth than 50% of the American population. Just for the record, the population of the United States is around 350 million. This one person owns more wealth than the bottom 50% of the entire country. That is not social justice, especially when there is a policy consistently, regardless of political party, although the GOP has moved to the far right and openly embraced authoritarianism and wants to make it the norm under the hybrid model, whereas the Democratic Party continues to, at least in theory, stick to pluralism and to diversity and equity, although in practice, if that political party had been more rooted in social justice policies, okay, and we had not seen under Democratic administrations, whether it was under Clinton, a neoliberal, by the way, no different than Reagan in terms of reality of policies, serving the narrow interests of Wall Street and the billionaire class. Then Obama, projecting an image of an FDR, a social democrat, but in reality pursuing neoliberal policies and transferring wealth to the billionaire class, as he himself, by the way, implied in a moment of self-reflection in the 2012 campaign, that his policies of economic recovery from the 2008 recession had really transferred, had really helped the billionaire class and Wall Street and had transferred income from the bottom up, but left the vast majority behind. So this is an important issue. Now, the rally, the mass demonstrations of the No King's Day, this was the second. The first was in June. The first one had about 5 million people roughly turn out, over 2,000 locations. This one, an estimated between 2,700 and 3,000 locations, much more, estimated 7,000 people. Was a peaceful demonstration with speakers. I had the opportunity to listen to some. Certainly you need days to listen to all of them, but I heard some highlights. And what I did hear is the desire of the American people, at least a segment of the American people, that want the country to adhere to the social contract as was intended by the founding fathers, especially rooted in Jeffersonian democracy, okay, not Jacksonian democracy, but the Jeffersonian democracy, a country struggling for its identity. Will the identity of this country go with the authoritarian neoliberals under this hybrid authoritarian regime in order to cater, as exactly as a number of speakers said in their speeches during the rally, to cater to the billionaire class surrounding the Trump administration? Not that the billionaires don't donate to Democrats. They're locking in their interests. They make sure that both parties get money so that both parties conduct public policy, not on behalf of the working class and the middle class, but on behalf of Wall Street. So the idea here is to decide what is the future of this country. What's the identity of this country? What's the future of American civilization? Will it become an authoritarian country, full-fledged authoritarian country down the road, as this decade, the 2020s, is the decade of the consolidation of hybrid authoritarianism? Now, the spokespeople for the Republicans insisted that this was, these people were Marxists, terrorists, Hamas supporters, funded by George Soros, the Hungarian Jewish billionaire, who is known for funding some liberal progressive events. When you look at the list, there are more than 200 progressive organizations, a lot of labor and middle class organizations. They made no secret of it. They came out in the open and said, hey, we support this. Now, if they, of course, had a sense of balance on the other side, on the side of the critics of the No King's Day, they would reveal who is funding hybrid authoritarianism. They would reveal who is funding, who are the 6 billionaire families funding Project 2025, which is to make the country much more monolithic, to end diversity, equity, and equity and inclusion, to chase out immigrants and use them, illegal immigrants, and use them as the boogeyman, use them as a distraction to continue class warfare in order to pursue policies like the 4.5 trillion givebacks to corporations and to the billionaires. Senator Bernie Sanders pointed out an interesting statistic. Of course, he's in the Senate, he's privy to the classified material, that the 1 trillion that the Trump administration, the Republicans, took out of Medicaid, which is intended to serve the poorest Americans, right, healthcare for them, that 1 trillion went to the pockets of the richest Americans. Okay, which includes, by the way, the Trump family. So the issue here is, what kind of society is the United States going to be? I invite you to join me for a very elaborate session on hybrid authoritarianism, because what my theme is here that hybrid authoritarianism contains so many contradictions that it is bound to self-destruct, because American society, from the founding fathers to the present, has deep roots in pluralism and diversity. It is a society of immigrants. The only Americans are the native Indians, the native Indian American population. That's it. The rest are all immigrants. Trump is an immigrant from an immigrant family from Germany. His wife is an immigrant. He has surrounded himself with a number of second and third generation immigrants. The issue is whether hybrid authoritarianism on its way to becoming full-fledged authoritarianism in America, which sends a signal to the rest of the world that authoritarianism is the new norm, it's the new democracy, and opposing it, by the way, is an anathema, and those opposing it will be punished. Whether that will prevail, or whether the vision of the founding fathers of a liberal democracy and policies rooted in social justice, whether that version will prevail. In my view, there are way too many contradictions in neoliberalism and in hybrid authoritarianism, under which neoliberalism operates. And those contradictions are manifested in everything from combating cultural diffusion in America, which is what has made America great, to use a term, great in terms of a creative society with so many creative minds in the 19th and the 20th century and the 21st century. Cultural diffusion means absorbing cultures from the rest of the world and enriching society, rather than in creating not a pluralistic society, but a monolithic society in order to serve the oligarchy, in order to serve Wall Street and the military-industrial complex. So the question is, will the neoliberal oligarchy prevail under a militarist police state model? That's the issue that I'm going to discuss in the longer video. Or will the US return to a model like the 1930s of FDR? And by the way, just for the record, the videos that I looked at from the speeches during the rally, the October 18th rally, the No King's Day rally, those speeches were all intended to argue that America is a pluralist society, that America is a society similar to that, rooted in the New Deal of the 1930s of FDR and in the Kennedy-Johnson era of the 1960s, the Great Society era, in a strong social safety net, not a corporate welfare state. I thank you for listening. I ask you to take a look at the longer video, and by all means, write comments and join this channel. Thank you very much.